This is Tamara Fleming, and I'm the author of Upswing 80 Mindful Practices to Shift Your Life from Blues to Bliss. And I have to tell you, I am absolutely ecstatic about having Sean on this interview today, because when I started writing Upswing, I went to find who out there is writing about bliss that really resonates with me and what the message that I'm trying to send. And so I found The Bliss Experiment by Sean Mesher, and I am too super excited about this conversation. So welcome, Sean. Thank you for joining me today. And what I want to do is just tell everyone a little bit more about you. I know from talking to you that you're not about the I, so I will share this in that spirit, because I just think you're an extraordinary person that's done extraordinary things, and you have great gifts to share people on the planet, and I'm grateful that you've joined us. So, all right, let me just share a little bit about you. So Sean has a degree in philosophy and religious studies from Stanford University. And after graduation for 15 years, he lived in a yoga ashram and community in Northern California, where he received an extensive instruction in meditation and spiritual practice, which we're going to talk about today. I have questions for you. While living in the ashram for the last 9 years, he was also CEO of a book publishing house and record label that specializes in personal development and Eastern religion books and recordings. So you're just an absolute gift to the world. He's certified in meditation and a yoga instructor and an ordained minister, and for a non-denominational organization that emphasizes the essential unity of all religions. And I love that part. He lives in Los Angeles with his partner, Brooke Cassidy, a well-known yoga and meditation instructor. And in addition to writing the Bliss Experiment book, Sean has also written for CBS News, The Huffington Post, Ask Men, and numerous other publications, as well as your latest book, which we'll talk about soon coming up here, which is Thriving on with Chronic Pain, right? Yes, indeed. Yeah. Welcome to the show, and I'm so excited to talk to you. All right, so I want to set this up because we could literally talk for days on this topic. So what I'm curious about is two pieces, which are the basics behind bliss, and then how to realize a state of bliss. And I want to say this, that we talked about this a little bit, but I had experienced my own version of bliss for about 3 solid weeks, and I had no words for it. So I know exactly what you're talking about, yet it's elusive. And it can be elusive in people's lives. And I want to really hear what you have to say about the difference between bliss and happiness and joy, and how those differences, because they're pretty vast. But I know that the listeners are going to want to know, how do I go about getting myself closer into a state of bliss? So let's start with the basics behind bliss. And I have a few pieces out of the book, quotes out of the book. And one of them that struck me that we can start with is, bliss is the solution to everything, and it's unbroken oneness. So take it away.
Well, Tamara, thank you for having me, first of all. So I think of bliss as our fundamental state, the fundamental state of our universe, our consciousness. It's everything that is, and everything that is not is what we're heaping on top of it. So bliss is something that's always there. It's not something we create. It's something we discover, we tap into. It's a little bit like gravity. And so it can become tricky because we're always, it's sort of everything. It's this undivided wholeness. One reason perhaps, you've talked about how you just experienced it yourself for 3 weeks, and yet it still felt elusive, is that's because often when we're not in it, what we're trying to do is use words to describe it, like we're doing right now, or we have creative images, but these are actually all generated usually when we're not in that state, trying to describe something that's beyond it and transcendent. It's It's basically a very complete whole sense where everything comes together. In the book, I almost describe it like white light. You know, what the color or the white light is sort of like every color combined together at once. And black is the absence of every color. So you think about what white light really, it has everything in the spectrum all at once. And so bliss is love and joy and peace and contentment and all of these things at once, completely undifferentiated. But of course, we seldom experience all those things at once, and we get pieces of it. We don't have the other pieces of it. We get them in all, but not always at the same time. And so it feels shifting to us. But beneath the surface, it's this one undifferentiated, undivided fullness that's always there.
I think that's the thing that I find most fascinating, that it's always there, you know, and all of the messages I'm sending right now is how to, you know, really understand your true self, your true divinity, your true person that's here, minus all of the ego pieces. And so if all of those things you just spoke about have to come together, then what is it that people can I'm going to say do, but be, to bring it together?
So ultimately it's a paradox in the sense that there are a lot of things we can do, and all of that doing needs to lead up or produce a state of being. So what does that mean? At a practical level, there are a lot of different specific things we can do to sort of orient ourselves towards bliss, to become aware that it exists, to start walking down the pathway towards it. And these are very concrete practices. You could think of them as a lot of the kinds of happiness advice that you'll find from positive psychologists, even spiritual practices like meditation. But none of these practices themselves are the end goal. Ultimately, they help lay the groundwork, they prepare you, and then the experience is the experience. And the practice doesn't quite produce it itself, it sort of just prepares you for it. And so you jump off, and that's why it can be so very difficult to get to, because there's a lot of preparatory work, and yet other people have experiences where they've made no conscious effort to do anything, prepare anything, and they feel this overwhelming positive sense that I would call bliss. You can be standing there at the ocean and feel it overwhelm you. You can have these incredible moments that just kind of come and go, but their sort of fleetingness is often the sign that we've been given a moment of grace, a blessing in a way, but because we can't understand it, grasp it, reproduce it, it means that there is some kind of fundamental groundwork and reorientation work that we haven't done to make it more consistent experience in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, you know, I think that's the thing I'm fascinated with, which is, okay, I was there once, I've had little windows into it before, but then after I went through that, I also went down into the deep, dark night of the soul for 3 years, to the crushing core of that experience. And so bliss to that, to coming back out, I feel like a much clearer container for it, because I'm kind of merging all of those experiences, which I feel like are on both ends of the spectrum. And I have appreciation from being in the dark night of the soul. But when you come back out to be in bliss and you're busy in the world, you know, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about duality too, because I've been sharing a little bit more about that in my video posts recently. But, you know, we're so busy in the world that we forget that we are in duality. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we all lose. I mean, so let me say this to back up. People, if you are in bliss consciousness 100% of the time, all day, every day, you are an enlightened spiritual master. You are Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and Moses and, you know, Muhammad. You are all the way there. So that is rare, not quite as rare as it might sound, because I just named a few famous people who we might think those are like the only ones in that entire tradition, which is not true. There are many, 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 but it is rare to be in it 100% of the time. So we're all going to have these ins and outs going back and forth. And it is very easy until you're in it all the time, till you've attained that sort of full-time level of consciousness. We're always at risk of slipping in and out. And when we're out, of forgetting what it was like to be in, how to get in. We get very distracted. It happens to myself all the time. Just to be very clear, I am not a Jesus, Buddha, Krishna level being myself. So I lose it all the time, Get distracted with work. I start, you know, I have an entire chapter in my book about how money can't buy happiness, but I will burn an entire 3-month cycle doing nothing but earning money to pay my credit card bill or rent or, you know, whatever. It happens to all of us. This is the nature of the battle. And that's the duality of it. There's the wholeness of bliss. And then there's the separation. It's a pseudo separation, because bliss is always there, like gravity is always there, but we lose awareness of it. And we start acting and behaving and having habit patterns that are outside of that consciousness. And when we're outside of that consciousness, by definition, then we've created this sense of there's that bliss consciousness there, then there's us over here. Those are two separate things. And we either forget that the other one exists, or we orient towards that bliss consciousness as a separate external thing to us, and we start behaving accordingly. And that's the challenge of the entire process. I mean, that is what we are trying to work out, trying to spend more and more time on the positive end of the spectrum. And we should, the word expect is not the right word. We don't want to expect to constantly slip out of it, but we need to accept that that's part of the process and just how it unfolds. Just like, think about whatever you're trying to do. You're trying to be a guitar player, a gymnast. You first start out, well, first of all, even before you start consciously trying to be a guitar player or gymnast, how good are you at guitar or gymnastics? You're terrible at them. You haven't even done them yet. You can't do them. You may not even know that gymnastics exists. Then the next step is you become aware and you start practicing. But how good is a beginner at that? Not very good at all. You could say that you're playing the guitar or you're taking a gym class, and therefore, in one sense, you're a gymnast, but in another sense, you're mostly not a gymnast on the scale of things. And so and that's kind of what it's like here. We become aware of a state of consciousness and being that we want, and we start to pursue it, and we're mostly not that. And we try over time to become more and more of that till we get to the higher expressions of it.
You know, that's great. It's good to put a little, relax on the human experience, because, I think I know for me, I strive for things, and I work for things. And a lot of times it's about allowing and letting be, letting it come in. You said in your book, there are a few chapter headings, and I just wanted to kind of go into a couple of those. One, which is releasing the past, And the other one, you've talked about awareness. The other one, though, is habit and consistency. So, and then I want to talk about the heart and opening the heart. So, releasing the past. What do you have to say about that? How does that impact how to be in bliss?
So there's a lot of scientific studies about this, but we can also just talk about our own experience. So releasing the past means that we have all had traumas, negative experiences, something that has happened in our lives. Some of us, very, very, very bad things have happened. Others, maybe only on the human scale of suffering, maybe only mild or medium things, but they often felt disastrous to us. A betrayal, relationship that disintegrated. And then, of course, there's very terrible things that can happen, sexual assaults and witnesses of horrible events and all kinds of things. What happens is that we tend to ruminate about those things. And to some degree, there is a period of time or a certain amount of doing that is healthy. We have to work through and process the things that have happened to us. We have to find out if there's something that we can learn from. We have to find out, in fact, if we don't actively intervene, we can't release the traumatic memories. Usually, memory, it won't just go away by itself. We have to actively go through some amount of time and process to look at what's happened and try and work it through. But then there becomes the moment where it becomes very unhealthy. And we have to understand a little bit about how our own minds work. And there's a lot of scientific studies that show this. Our minds, our memories are not Xerox perfect carbon copies of what happened in the past. Our memories are selective. We don't remember every single thing that's ever happened. We have a bias towards remembering very outstanding events. And more than that, they've proven this scientifically in a variety of laboratory environments. Our own memory is biased towards remembering negative things that happened to us. There's probably a Darwinian evolutionary reason why it made sense to evolve and always remember the really bad things, because that's a way of remembering what's dangerous, what could kill us. But we have this bias in our memories. Our memories become overwhelmingly focused on negative and traumatic things. We spend more and more time. First of all, as life goes on, you accumulate a never-ending series of bad things that happen. It's just part of being alive. The more we ruminate on those things, the more they pull us back into them, and we're actually reliving them. We become very depressed, become anxious. We feel a sense of hopelessness. All kinds of negative emotions start to come. So at a certain point, while facing what's happened and our traumas is very important, the reason we need to face them is to let them go, is to find a way to work through them, not to endlessly relive them. And some of us, myself included, at different times have become caught in cycles of just endlessly, fruitlessly reliving them instead of finding a way to get past them so that we can move on. If we can't do that, if we cannot release those past traumas, then they overwhelm us. There's no room anymore for any positive forward momentum.
Very well said. Very well said. I know I spent recently 7 years with a spiritual teacher in a deep diving into all the traumas. But when I came out the other side of that, what I realized that I had just replayed and replayed and replayed. So where in there were you really, really letting go and healing the past and truly letting it go? And sometimes we have to cycle around that a few times until it's time to let it go. But I think it's really interesting because I think I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. There's a point at which you go, enough is enough. And I know that I'm a being beyond my imagination and that I can experience that in my life. So what do you have to say about that transition? Is it a decision? Is it a layered experience?
It's all of the above. Ultimately, there's a decision that we have to make. It's often a process for us to get there. We, when we're overwhelmed by something traumatic that's happened. So this actually, and this dovetails into the other point that you brought up. We create habit patterns in our mind when we start anything we think about, positive, negative, starts to create a groove in our mind. I literally think of it. Imagine the mind starts sort of as this isn't technically or scientifically accurate. This is just a way of thinking about it. Imagine though that you have like a flat plain that's perfectly smooth, a desert landscape, all smooth, all hard compacted. Rain comes and it hits it, and then it starts creating a little bit of a channel through the desert sand. And then a deluge comes, and the next time the deluge comes, where does it come? It goes right into those channels, and it starts deepening and widening those same channels. And that's a lot of how our own thoughts and mind work. We wire together neurons and neural pathways based on these thoughts that we have, and we start reinforcing whatever thought we're having. Our mind starts to wire around that, creates grooves in the mind. And so what happens is that the more we dwell on something positive or negative, the more that becomes sort of the grooves, the easy pathway that's created in our mind. It reinforces it. The deeper and deeper that channel is, the harder and harder it is to get out of, to rewire, to redirect, to re-excavate. So when we're trying, the first thing is we have to become aware that we've often built these channels and grooves, these neural pathways in our mind, these reflexive ways of thinking and experiencing these reflexive emotions. It can be anger and sadness and loneliness. And then we have to start, at some point, we have to make a conscious choice to do something about that. So it starts with awareness, and then we do have to start counteracting that. And then the good news about it all is that that groove creating process in the mind is essentially neutral. It can work for us in positive ways. So you start doing sort of rewiring the neural pathways in a positive way, and then that takes on its own momentum and it becomes easier. It's not always a long, hard slog. You have to break out of a bad groove early. You create a good groove, and then that has its own momentum. And it can almost become like in the background, a subconscious positive process for you. And it's not such a conscious trial anymore.
Yeah. Okay. So, and there are a lot of, I love the emergence of energy psychology and different methods out there to release those, to really get your neural network disconnected from the trigger, right?
There's there any a lot of ways. There's no one way. No, I would say that there's a lot. I wouldn't say that every way works, and not every way works equally, but there are many ways to do it and many tools. And I always hesitate to say there's only one. There's never just one good solution or one system, but in general, there are directionally better and worse ways of doing it.
Yeah, very personal for what works, right? What works for a person. So let's go back to the idea of bliss and the concept of things falling away, or the ego receding, if you will. I talked yesterday about the ego being in the back seat and the heart being in the front seat. So, and I talk a lot about getting into the heart. So I'd love to hear your perspective on moving into a state of bliss by meditating, by getting into the heart, and how to go about doing that.
Okay, so that's a really good question. And there's a lot of pieces to that. There's sort of two ways of doing it, and they're probably both good and both sort of simultaneous. One way is, of course, we can make a conscious decision. And I have this problem. I started off sort of as a philosophy professor type. And what do philosophy professors do? They think a lot, they categorize the world, they study the world, they write about it, they dissect it. I have that kind of brain, which makes me tend to be a brain forward person. And so what I have to do is two things. You have to consciously try and feel intuitively. Just, it's interesting you talk about leading from the heart. That's actually a literal practice that can work. Taking a moment, taking an opportunity or situation, and literally telling yourself, I want to lead from the heart in this situation, actually works. It can turn off your mind and make you more aware of a feeling state. And you can tell yourself, I want to lead from a feeling state. If that doesn't come naturally to you or isn't happening in that moment, literally just telling yourself that, your being will follow that mental command. You might have to reinforce it a few times. And the other aspect of sort of a feeling state, I think the real way that you reinforce it is through compassion and empathy. When you feel empathy and compassion for other human beings, that is a way of directly connecting with them in a way that bypasses categorization, who they are in some series of qualities, what they look like, what their belief systems are. Empathy is connecting with them on a much deeper heart-to-heart level. And when you build that bridge of compassion directly between you and another person, you bypass a lot of the mental stuff that we do around judging other people, thinking about other people, categorizing other people. So it's a very active thing. You have to think about consciously building a bridge. It's not really emotional. Sometimes we think of heart equals emotion, but I think of heart equals empathy and compassion and unconditional love, which are not emotions. Those are beyond emotions. So we have to do that. And then the other thing that, Tamara, you referred to, you were talking about meditation. One thing, there's types of meditation that are very based on directly opening the heart. The other forms of meditation, you could say, are about quieting the mind. So it's talking about how we often lead from a very mental perspective of the world and analyzing people and ourselves. So a lot of what meditation practices are quieting the mind, almost shutting it off or shutting it down. So if we can quiet the mind on one hand, build bridges of compassion and unconditional love on the other hand, together, that's how we get to relate and be in that kind of state of being that you're talking about.
I love the way you describe bridges. That's a beautiful way to give people, I think, an image for what they're doing with themselves. I know that when I'm going to say popped myself into a state of bliss, I'd been doing a number of different pieces of the work, but I also had an experience where I was sitting watching two people, another person help another person who was distressed. And I was in my heart, without judgment, holding open this heart space. And I believe that really popped me into the experience.
I know it did. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been trying to trace it back, and then I also had a conflict in that experience, in those couple of days, where I went in and I really owned the experience and again, went back into my heart. So I was literally practicing looking out through my eyes, through my heart, without judgment, and seeing beauty and love everywhere. And then it just kind of was like diving into a pool of beautiful, warm water. And I had no words. all I could do was cry. It just brings it up now. I could just cry. And I said, you know, I was saying to my spiritual teacher at the time, everyone needs to know this. Everyone needs to know this. How can we help everyone know this? So
that's exactly it. That's exactly it. I had a similar experience that I wrote about it a little bit, I think, in the Bliss Experiment. I have chronic pain, and I was in a really, it was early, and when I really injured myself, and I was lying in my bedroom, dark, all by myself. I was in phenomenal amounts of pain and very depressed, feeling kind of hopeless in that moment. The shades in my room were drawn, but two young children who were my next door neighbors started playing outside. And I could hear them laughing and just behaving like children in the beautiful, like after what we visualize children at like their best, happy and joyous. And I was lying there in the dark, feeling very depressed. And somehow that laughter and the joy and sort of the pureness of what they were experiencing in that moment penetrated right through the darkness, the literal darkness and figurative darkness that I was in. And I just started tuning into their laughter and then their joy behind the laughter. And all of a sudden, even though I was in a terrible place, physically terrible and mentally terrible, I was completely transported. And I felt this overwhelming sense of bliss just come over me. And it came in the darkest place. And I hadn't been doing any practice right in that moment to try and make it happen. It just happened. And it was transformational in that moment. I mean, I had known about it. I'd been doing this stuff for years before then. Totally, my own pain and suffering had taken me out of it. I'd forgotten it. And it brought me back into it. And that was one of the experiences that helped turn me back around from the dark hole I was going into myself. And those things happen, and they are incredibly important when they happen, and we have to seize on them and understand them and pursue them when they do. Those are lifelines.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because I think a lot of people are confused, or it's a mystery. It stays a mystery, but they're actually being aware. You were aware that those children were outside. You were aware of that. And then you got curious about that joy, and then you fell into it, right? So in our conscious awakening, we are on a journey, and I know you promote this, and that's why we're having this interview, and I promote this, which is, if you want it, you can have it. Leave the victimhood behind, because, for instance, like with you being in deep pain and getting yourself into a state of bliss, it's possible. It's right there for you, right? And I just find that we are just so incredibly powerful, and we don't know it most of the time, until we know it. And then we're like, ooh, you have a taste of that, and you're like, okay, that's repeatable. How do I do that again?
Yeah.
So what would you say about consistency and decision-making and consistency?
So that is the trick at the end of the day. And so, for example, in the Bliss Experiment book, only the last section of it actually talks about bliss itself and what you could call directly bliss practices. And I actually spend at least 200, maybe more pages before that, talking about all kinds of not bliss practices, happiness practices, releasing the past, as we've talked about, all bunch of other stuff too. And the reason is that we do have to continually prepare the ground, look at the different things that are holding us back from these experiences, and constantly be doing some kind of positive intervention on a regular basis. If we don't take some kind of actions, if we don't implement a way of moving in the right direction, then all that's going to happen is that the world is going to pull us away from that. We're going to be endlessly distracted. We're going to distract ourselves with our own negative thoughts and emotions. We have to intervene. And the sad thing is, in a way, sad is the wrong word, but the reality of it is that you always have to, until you're all the way in a state of bliss 24 hours a day, there's always some amount of effort, awareness, practice that has to go into it. I mean, if you're learning guitar gymnastics, even if you've been doing it for 10 years and you're a pretty good gymnast, you're probably not the greatest gymnast in the world or guitarist right at that moment. And you have to keep practicing. I mean, I know a guitarist who is one of the world's most famous guitarists. And I know for a fact, and now he has been doing it 40 years, he's famous. A lot of people would consider him one of the really best guitarists. And I know for a fact that he still practices. And if he stopped practicing, he would get bad at the guitar. He would go on stage and he would mess stuff up. And maybe his version of messing it up isn't the same as me picking up a guitar for the first time. I mean, it would still be something, but it would be way less than what he's capable of. So there's no getting away. You have to keep practicing. I mean, whatever you're doing, you have to keep doing it. And we have to do that. And so that's some of what consistency is. There's one quick flip side to it that I would say, which is that it's a global kind of consistency. It doesn't have to be a specific practice. Let's just say, throw out, right now you're really doing a lot of work with affirmations. What I'm not saying, and what you don't have to do, is say to yourself, I have to do this specific affirmation practice every day for the rest of my life or I'm screwed. It's not like you can do that for a while, that can run its course. Then you can pick up a different kind of practice, gratitude, meditation practice. You can meditate every day, but you can switch up your types of meditation practices or the length you do them. Or there's so many different variations that you don't have to think of it as something that's like long and boring and monotonous. First of all, it's the opposite of that, because the more you do it, the easier it becomes. But it's also not monotonous because there's a tremendous amount of variety that you're allowed within that concept of being consistent.
Yeah. Okay. So you can change your mind, but stay consistent when you're working on something. Stay with it and stay consistent with it.
Yeah, you have to stay working on what it is that you're working towards, but there's a lot of different ways to do it. I mean, think about playing the guitar. You can do scales one day and you can play a certain type of song. You can play the lead guitar based parts the next day, and you can practice rhythm guitar the next day, and you can play with the band the fourth day. And the next day after that, you can pick up an acoustic guitar instead of an electric guitar. There's a lot of variation that you can do to keep yourself from being bored. And of course, you can take some days off too when you feel like you need to.
Yeah, I think being easy on yourself, right, yeah, as you go into the journey. So I just wanted to mention too to everyone that this is the book right here, The Bliss Experiment. And I know that there's some breathing exercises on page 263, which are very, very helpful. We're going to be talking in the group that we have here about breathing. And are there any other like really simple ideas that you can give people to help them lead themselves to bliss? Some practices, meaning like breathing.
Yeah, there's a lot of good things. Certainly on the highest end of the scale, if I was going to say there's one thing that everyone should do, is learn a meditation technique. There are a lot of them, and there are different schools. Pick one that works with you. There's mantra ones, awareness ones, breathing oriented ones. Pick one, start learning and practicing. If you're totally not getting traction with it, then go pick a different one. Do it for a few minutes a day. But consistently do that. And even if it's just a few minutes a day, that's the number one thing. That the amount of scientific and spiritual evidence behind meditation is so overwhelming that if you're just going to do one thing, do that. But there are other things that you can either layer in, or if that it's just sounding like you can't do it, or you tried once and you're still kind of burned out from that experience, something that I found really works very well, very quickly, always has a positive effect every day and time I do it, is the simple practice of gratitude. I look around at the things that I have, the computer in front of me, this house that we live in. Of course, those are material things. Look at the relationship that I have with my partner. Look at some of the work that I get to do. Look at the fact that I get to talk with you right now, and actually take a moment to absorb that. Remind yourself of how fantastic that is. Maybe your health is good. Maybe you had a really nice cup of tea or a nice time at lunch with your friend yesterday. Maybe it is something material. I mean, as you know, I'm a little bit hesitant about fetishizing material objects and money, but if you have something, it's not about like trying to spend your whole life getting some other thing that you think is going to make you happy, but you've got something in front of you, whether it's your phone or your car. Take a minute to appreciate it. Whatever it is about it, believe it or not, they have actually measured in scientific studies in my own life and everyone I know that this immediately boosts your happiness and your sense of well-being. It's so simple, and it always works.
Focusing. What you focus on expands, right? That whole idea. Yeah.
And it's remembering too, like, so there's this thing that happens in the world. It's called hedonic adaptation, right? So, and what hedonic adaptation is like you walk into a room and it smells really badly. The moment you walk in, you're totally hit with that smell. Then you close yourself in that room, and what happens? An hour, 2 hours later, you don't even notice that it smells anymore. You've adapted to that, and it kind of falls away as a background thing. And that's one reason we keep pursuing money and sex and fame and powers. We get some of it, then we get used to it. It's no longer enough. We need to go get more. On the positive side, and we also adapt to, we adapt to everything in our lives like that. And then they stop giving us pleasure, happiness, joy at the highest end, a good relationship. What gratitude does is it actually resets hedonic adaptation. So you spend all this money to get yourself a fancy house or a fancy car. Its charms are wearing off on you. You now want a bigger house, a bigger car. You're traveling around the world, which is awesome, but you're paying a coach price instead of getting to fly in your own private jet. And suddenly it's not good enough. Practicing gratitude with what you have right now actually resets hedonic adaptation. It's like you're in a room, you've blocked out the positive or negative smell, but if you were to stop and take a moment to retune into it, you can actually reset that experience. And so we can reset it very positively. You can take your fancy car that no longer gives you joy, and before you get into it, take a moment to actually look at it and appreciate, and try and remember why you bought it, why you enjoy it. And believe it or not, you haven't done anything new, you haven't spent any new money, and you're getting all of the benefits of it all over again.
Brilliant. And we have that power all the time, anytime that we want it.
All day, every day.
I know when I studied Wallace Wattles And when
Mhm.
I really got what Wallace Wattles was saying in his strange, new thought, beginning new thought language, right? I got it. And I'm like, oh my God, the stuff of the universe that we're really shaping and molding to our own experience when we do that. So, yep, brilliant. Gratitude. Well, I don't want to keep you all day long, but I certainly could. Is there anything else that you would like to share about bliss? That would, I know you did this call because you really want to help people learn their way into these higher states. What would you say?
I would say a little bit is a lot. A little bit is good enough in a way. It's so easy to become overwhelmed in expectation or what we decide is the magnitude of the task. But a little bit, just a little bit of practice, a little bit of experience pays massive dividends so far out of proportion. It is not linear, it is geometric. You, a little bit can completely change your life. A medium amount transforms everything beyond comprehension. So it's not a daunting task. That's one thing. The other thing is that just keep doing, find little things to do and to try. Accept that there will be good days and bad days, days you forget entirely that you're even interested in this, or you forget all of the practices, the mindset, everything backslides. That's all part of it, and that's okay. You have to create the space for that. The sort of one of the worst things that we could do, and we do this in all kinds of things, like you want to do something and you get on a groove with it for a little bit, and then it falls away for some reason, and then you tell yourself, well, I blew that, or I can't go back to it. My opportunity is gone, or maybe you even convince yourself it didn't work. But then again, that was really because it's like taking a guitar lesson. To become a master guitar player takes years. So if I take 1 year of guitar lessons and I turn around and say I'm not Duane Allman yet, not Jimi Hendrix, it doesn't work. That's kind of maybe having an unrealistic expectation of how the process works, that 1 year makes you Jimi Hendrix. Maybe you really do believe that. And so you need to become aware of just set it up in the right way. But then the other thing is be conscious of maybe you don't really believe that and you're kind of using that as an excuse. Just be aware of how we can trick ourselves sometimes into taking what we think is an easier way out, or we get frustrated, and that's all okay. But just find some way, some tiny, tiny way to make one little bit of progress at a time. Maybe it's not even a day, a week, a month, whatever kind of unit, just have a sense of moving forward. And then before you know it, you'll be so much further along, and the whole thing won't have been painless or hard, and it'll be great, and you'll be where you need to be. And you just get there a little bit at a time, and that's okay. It's just, you have to have that kind of orientation and no expectation in a way. Our expectations often work against us. So the right expectations, or no expectation, however you want to put it, helps us move forward.
Well said. Okay, so I have a question about that. You're really promoting relax. There are a lot of different ways. The ebb and the flow of life are perfectly natural and fine. That there's, you don't have to make it this big goal to go get. When you started out as a spiritual seeker, because you have gone wide and vast, were you all gung-ho? Have you learned how to lay back and relax? And is it, in all your wisdom, would you say that's what you would tell people to do?
So, okay, so now that's a fantastic question. And now let me add / clarify this. Life is filled with rhythms. There are times when it is good and appropriate to dive very deep and very intensively. And then there are other times where a relaxed kind of rhythm is the right thing. Life has cycles and it has rhythms. You probably, this is not universal. There are 7 billion people on Earth now. Everybody's got a slightly different need and story, but in broad strokes, absolutely, there are times when it's going to be right to get very deep, very intensive, very immersed in every cell in your body. And those will be very productive and important times. And they should be when they're happening or when you feel like you want one to happen or need it. It's just happening anyway. You should get as deep into it as you can. Dive in. Chances are it won't be a 60-year journey for you. It'll be a small period of time in the scale of your life and human life, but it will be immensely productive. And do it as deep as you can, as hard as you can, if that's what's happening. Then there will be other periods where it's like just barely the tip, barely a part of what your daily life is, but you have to keep it there somehow to keep it alive. And then there'll be middle periods where it's a little bit of both. And it's just a rhythm and a flow, and it's not one or the other. You have to do both, and whatever's happening, how it's happening.
I love the way you say that, because it puts some grace and ease in being human, and learning to be a being. And, it's a big job. And for seekers, I think I see now with conscious evolution, a lot of seekers are kind of coming into a rhythm really with seeking, right? It's not as, like the approach to 2012 was like, oh my God, right? Everything was going on. And now there's this kind of, we're now 17 years or 5 years past that point, right? But 17 years past 2000, and as we watch conscious evolution, it looks like it's becoming much more like what you're saying, which is relaxed and a part of life versus this thing to attain.
Yeah, and that's the paradox of it. It's both things in a way. We don't attain it, we discover it, we experience it. But on the other hand, yeah, we have to be aware that it exists as it's a goal without being a goal. It's hard because these are all paradoxes. What does it mean to have a goal without being a goal? So, but I think that when you say that, people kind of do understand what that means. That's, we have to have it as a vision and a direction. We have to be, what we can't do is make it a grind. If you turn the seeking of bliss into this unpleasant grind, you're actually doing the opposite. That's all there is to it. If you make bliss an unpleasant burden, then by definition, you've already missed the mark. So we have to constantly reorient around that and just be aware of what's feeling right in the moment. There were many years I spent very intensively in an ashram doing spiritual practices. And Tim, as we discussed earlier off this thing, like right now, I am writing my 3rd book, but I'm doing some business consulting work for tech startups. And like I was in the city of San Francisco yesterday and at a startup all day and doing some marketing and sales stuff for them. And they sell banking software. This has nothing to do with my book in a way, or my life pursuit, you could say, but there's a lot of good reasons that's the rhythm in my life right now. And that's just part of it. And right now I'm not in an ashram and I'm not meditating 8 hours a day and I'm not immersed in that, but do other things in other ways. And that's part of how it is and part of how we have to look at it and think about it.
Beautiful, beautifully said, beautifully said. Well, I just want to thank you for taking the time today out of your busy schedule to communicate with everybody that's going to be listening and watching this forever. Had a little technical difficulty. It seems to be a part of my rhythm right now as I'm resetting my life. But this is a really juicy interview. It'll be available to everyone for a long time. And I just want to thank you for writing The Bliss Experiment in 2012. It's just a book that I literally carry around with me. It's one of those ones that's become my favorite. And you can get it for anyone who's listening on Amazon. And then your second book is Thriving with Chronic Pain, A Holistic Guide to Reclaiming Your Life. You wrote that just a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And now your third book, are you ready to say anything about that?
Well, I'm actually writing my first novel that's being edited as we speak. I started my life long before I ever ran a publishing company or then started writing and teaching myself. My earliest incarnation as a teenager was writing fiction. And at Stanford, I did some creative writing. They have a very famous program there. And that was sort of always part of my DNA. And I thought I was either going to be like a philosophy professor or write literature. That was what I thought when I was like 20 something. And then life took me in a totally different direction. And then after I finished my second book, I felt a strong need to circle back to that. And so just coming towards the end of the process with that, and we shall see where it goes. It's, I'm editing it down right now, and then we'll see what happens.
Well, you're a beautiful writer. I love reading your writing. It's been a great journey, and like I said, I do keep this book cherished on my nightstand. So, yeah, thank you for everything.
It's very kind of you. Thank you.
Look forward to your novel. So thank you for joining me today and sharing everything of you with everyone that we have. I know that there are people that are watching this that are getting great, deep value out of it. So you're changing lives, and I know that's your purpose. And thanks for being with me today.
Thank you, Tamara, for having me anytime.
Yeah, you can reach Sean at Sean Mescherer, and I'm saying your last name correctly, yes?
Mescherer.
Mescherer.
But no one ever pronounces it right, so.
Yeah, I have been doing that the wrong way. Mescherer, and that's SeaNmeshorer. And I will put all the links along with this video so that you can learn more about Sean and look forward to your novel.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. All right.